have your attention, please? Good morning. Good morning. Well, I never expected that.
Once again.
Well, here we are, starting the second day of the second International Brass Congress. And what a wonderful experience it is, I think, for all of us to be embraced by so many colleagues from so many distant places. One of the colleagues that we have most admired for many years is with us this morning, and if he doesn't mind, I'd like to tell you a very quick story which came about in casual conversation with this gentleman.
Oh, no.
Every year, the London Symphony, of which he is a distinguished member, all tuba players being distinguished, every year the London Symphony performs a royal concert, which is of course attended by the royalty of that great country, England, and I should say Great Britain and a good bit of the rest of the world, including the colonies. But not to digress, they performed their annual royal concert, and this gentleman was featured as soloist in the Ralph Vaughan Williams Concerto for Tuba and Orchestra, and made quite an impression, I'm certain, because some 2 weeks later, the Queen was touring the Royal Academy of Music, and the students and faculty, of course, all lined up to be received by the Queen. And a young tubist named Stephen, I forget his last name, who was quite a handsome lad and who made quite an impression on the Queen, and so she chatted with him for a moment. And when it came out that he was a tubist, she said, "Oh, you must know John Fletcher." So, I think everyone knows John Fletcher, not only from his incredible work with the Philip Jones Ensemble, Philip Jones Quintet, with the London Symphony. He's a great soloist. He's a great orchestral player. He covers it all, and he's proven it many times on record. It's a matter of record, let's say. And we're so proud to have him with us, and we want to express our thanks to Boozy and Hawks for sponsoring John and for making it possible for him to be with us this morning. Please welcome Mr. John Fletcher.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for all getting up so early. And thank you, Alka-Seltzer, or whoever enabled you to do it. I'm here. I should actually begin by saying, before I begin, are there any more questions? This is your session. I mean, I'm here as a kind of whatever it is. But it is yours. It's unusual for a number of reasons. Perhaps the biggest reason is that I'm British, and at these big international gatherings, it's very unusual for the British to be represented. I shall talk about that. But it is very unusual. It's a very unusual place, Britain. It's a tiny island crowded with a lot of people, and we behave like it. We're a trifle insular, we're very shy. At the same time, I think it's true to say statistically we have more tuba players per square metre in Britain than anywhere else in the world. Now, possibly on that grounds alone, we should occasionally show our faces and stand up and be counted, even though it's a daunting and terrifying prospect. I do thrive on questions. I do want to cover areas of the musical world which you probably don't know a great deal about. We are very different from you. When I say you, I mean the Americans. We have, of course, Europeans here. They are perhaps more of American persuasion than British. This is a simple statement of fact. And there's a lot in our playing traditions and our attitudes which sometimes puzzles people a little bit. But it seems a shame because, we're very comfortable, easygoing folk. We're a bit bone idle and we're a bit shy. But we do an awful lot of brass playing, an awful lot of tuba playing. We do very high mileage. Tuba activity in Britain falls, I suppose, into three categories. The biggest, statistically the biggest, obviously, is our brass band movement, which is an absolute pride and joy. I know that there are English brass band enthusiasts in America, and there are people with the odd record here and there of famous bands like Brighouse and Rastrick and Black Dyke Mills and various others. Lovely names evoking spoiled 19th century landscapes. The brass bands did grow up in the 19th century around the industrial areas, which means the coal fields, which means Yorkshire, where I come from, Lancashire, where Lancastrians come from, Wales, and parts of Scotland. There are brass players in other parts of the country, and some of them do quite well. We very rarely attend what we call jamborees of this sort. Our jamborees happen twice a year. They are the national championships in Manchester and the Open Brass Band Championships at the Royal Albert Hall. There, the brass bands fight it out. There, the standard is absolutely astonishing. I've been there either just as purely as an onlooker or as an adjudicator sometimes, and I'm breathless at the end of the day by the pure technical standard reached, and also the elegance and the smoothness of technique and all the other virtues that one looks for in the English type of brass band. They are an astonishing movement. They thrive on competition. They are very gentle folk outside competition, but when they get to the Royal Albert Hall, my God, the things they say about each other is extraordinary. But very few Americans actually know about this. I mean, I have taken the odd American friend to hear the odd English band playing. The places where they rehearse often defy description. You can barely get the band into the hut. And very often the ceiling's very low and all the fire regulations are broken. But they don't seem to have fires. There's usually a bar attached. Indeed, one of the bands called Wingate's Temperance is actually sponsored by one of our big breweries. It's amazing how history changes things. Those are the brass bands, and most of our best brass players in Britain come from the brass bands. I'll move on though to the other areas because that in itself is a fairly massive statement involving a lot of things. We have then the military bands, which are very, very good. They are, a lot of them, many of the regiments have their own military band, some of them are exceedingly good. They're not the same as an American wind band, and they're not the same as your American service bands either. It is the English military band. There are slight differences. The dialect is different and the uniforms are all different. But they're very good. They tour the world. I remember meeting two of them in the lobby of an hotel in Washington. You couldn't move for tuba cases. They do travel around and people do get to hear them. Then we have the symphony, or the Salvation Army, of course, is the nearest to what you know in this country, the Salvation Army bands. In a way, the Sally Bash, as we call them, are insular, although many of us have a great deal to do with them. We all are very much interbred in a way, but they have their own function within the army, and they're less bothered about the world outside than as the actual championship brass bands, which are quite a separate thing. There are quite a number of stunning Salvation Army bands in Britain too. The formation, the blend of instruments is sometimes different because they don't have to abide by the contesting rules as to what is allowed and what isn't. And we have the symphony orchestras, which I am a member, the London Symphony Orchestra. We have 14, we have, I keep forgetting, we have about, there are 14 full-time professional jobs for a tuba player playing straight symphonic music in England, 14. Which means that the amount of traffic in my area is very small. Every single job is watched closely. Most of the tuba students can tell you exactly how old I am and how old my colleagues are, how long we've been in the jobs, how long we have to go till pension. These statistics are common knowledge. As far as the actual professional opportunities are concerned, it is obviously a fairly grave situation because the music profession is serviced by our colleges of music. We don't have the university campus scene that you have here. We have universities attached to towns which have a music department academically but do not specialise in instrumental playing. The instrumental playing side of things is done at the colleges of music. There are 4 or 5 in London, 5, which is idiotically too many, but it's a relic of the 19th century when they were actually little more than finishing houses for nice young men and ladies who need to be able to play songs without words after dinner and to be able to sing a few ballads. But they finally came to service the professions on all instruments. So we have 5 in London, we have 1 very grand one in Manchester and 1 in Glasgow. Each one of them probably has about 6 tuba players. Okay, do your arithmetic. That means that about 2 per year probably graduate from each one. We're talking about tiny numbers compared with the States, but we're talking about a tiny professional situation for them to go into. So clearly, statistically, you could say we're in a much worse position than anybody because, believe me, the standards these days are very, very high. The last 10 years has seen the same kind of tuba explosion in Britain that we've seen in the United States. There may be many reasons for this. One can only speculate, but there are millions of very, very good tuba players in England coming out, and we have forever the perennial business. What do we do with them? How do we keep up their spirits? How do we keep them working? How do we maintain the essential level of optimism, which is the divine right of each individual to say, I am going to be the best tuba player in this London, I am going to make it to the London Symphony Orchestra. That has got to be or whatever it is, any orchestra. Many of them, of course, take one look at the situation, the statistics of the situation, and opt for teaching, where, of course, they go back into society anywhere, and suddenly you see 5 brilliant young tuba players per year emerging in some quite out-of-the-way place which you never heard of the tuba previously. And so the situation builds up. We have hundreds of them. We're actually following the States, maybe 10 years late, 15 years late. And it's beginning to show itself now at Christmas. We have our tuba Christmases. And we love it. And people come from all over the place. The nice thing is, of course, that we all face the same way, so we can fit into a smaller space. So that's the tuba scene. It's an exciting one and a daunting one, and I very much enjoy being part of it. I wouldn't be missing it for anything, even though there are a lot of disappointed people. We have to start to persuade them not to be disappointed, and most of them are very good about it, I must say. No queries so far. Well, what I would like, actually, if any of you are puzzled either by what I've said or by the transatlantic language barrier, which is quite a serious matter, please stick your hand up and please ask for a translation. For instance, I see this is called a clinic. In England, a clinic is a place where you go to have venereal diseases cured. We sometimes call them master classes. That makes us giggle. You see, all these terms give us the giggles, but it's difficult to explain. It's not a master class because you're not a class and I'm not a master. The best offer I can make you is that I've done a tremendous mileage with this beast, whose virtues I'm here to extol today on behalf of Boozy and Hawks. Boozy and Hawks. Is he still here? Yeah, Boozy and Hawks. But more about that later when I'm talking about gear. We call them a laugh-in, but you can't call it a laugh-in in America because of Rowan and Martin. So we've got to think of a new terminology for a gathering like this where tuba is being talked about. One will spring to mind. How are we doing? My hand went up a minute ago.
Start with a two-part question. Can you describe for us the difference in the British tuba playing tradition, and do all these excess tuba players have any trouble getting jobs on the continent? There's many specializations.
Did you all hear the question? Do we have a tuba playing tradition, a stylistic tradition in England? I mean, I was going to lead on to that anyway. Let's talk about it now. Gustav Mahler said tradition is slovenliness. So when we're talking about tradition, do remember that first. A tradition, if we're talking about a tradition, we want to know what is good. And this is something about which I feel very, very strongly. I'm British, this tuba is British. The British have used tubas like this since tubas were invented in Britain. It is really based on the French type of instrument, emphatically not the German. We go that way with pistons, as do a lot of other nations, but basically that was an Anglo-French Belgian thing. The Germans go that way with rotors. And there are lots of sub-paragraphs. You'll have to forgive me if I get them all in the wrong order. I play a German tuba in a symphony orchestra. A large Rudy Meinl with 5 valves. It's not a pretty sound I make on it. I can bring a few double bass players here to testify to that. It's not meant to be pretty. I don't think the large German tuba is meant to be elegant. The large German tuba is a very, very massive and solid additive. But that's another sidetrack. This instrument is traditionally the brass band E-flat bass, and it's recently been developed rather to satisfy symphonic needs and also the needs of people trying to play it on its own. Yes, we do have a sort of English tradition, but it is in a state of disarray at the moment. I think that we should hang on to that style because we're British. We've seen, I think, gradually over the past 10 years, and I'm preaching a sermon now, it starts now, of intercontinental, intercultural exchange, which I think is a good thing. I think one should constantly listen to what other people are doing. It's been my privilege, I think, I can safely say more than any other British tuba player, to travel a great deal. During my travels, this is either with the London Symphony Orchestra or the Philip Jones. Do you have a Heineken advert here which says Heineken reaches the parts that other beers don't reach? They're very good, actually, the English versions. The drawings are very good. The Philip Jones group ensemble, be it 5 players or 10 or even more than that, does get to places where symphony orchestras never get to, including the United States. And so I've seen and heard, I get to see and hear a fantastic amount of tuba playing in all parts of the world, and this is my privilege. However, it's a terribly confusing thing. I do sometimes think that if I'd stayed at home and just said, this is an English E-flat bass player and it goes like this, I would be better off. Because traditions have to be partly handed down by ignorance. And, well, not so much ignorance, but by the gradual discarding of all the various things that have made an impression on you at various times. I've been influenced and knocked out by virtually every marvellous tuba player in the world, and my goodness, there are a lot of them. And thank goodness, too, that in other countries they all play rather differently. I would like that to be maintained. There is a danger of, can I say, Americanization. a lot of my colleagues in England sometimes think I'm sounding quite American these days. And I say, oh, really? And I'm rather pleased because considering how much I admire a huge number of American tuba players and how I subconsciously seek to emulate them and copy them, it's not surprising that bits of American dialect come into my playing. But I do believe in the preservation of dialects, provided that's not a cover-up for bone idleness and parochial nothingness. And that is, of course, the danger. There's a lot of bad playing that takes place throughout the world, coming under the banner of tradition. And that's what Gustav Mahler was talking about. You asked a question, actually. We do have a style in England. It's not quite as aggressive as the American style. It's not quite so, should I say, stage centre operatic. And the reasons are perfectly simple. Our brass bands are very, very close-knit and homogeneous groups. And the basic sound quality is that of the sax horn, which is a conical instrument, and not the brilliant aggressive sounds of the straight trumpet and trombone, but much more the sax horn sound, which is mellower, and its great strength is fantastic blend, beautiful blend, and absolute homogeneity. Which means that as a race we're not quite as aggressive, and if people do get into a brass band and start playing like I do sometimes, they'd be out. You know, if I turn up to Black Dyke Mills and play the way I do, it's a bit loud for our purposes, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. I would be out. They have a tradition. My goodness, it's a tradition. They stay with it and they play that way. They expect newcomers to play that way. Even more than the other Philharmonic, who have always been a traditional outfit. But the best English brass bands have held on to those traditions. We have a new breed of tuba player these days who is playing more aggressively, rather louder, opening up the dynamic range, because we now have more things for tuba players to do. The brass band is a marvellous way of living, you know, for a person who wants to play in the evenings. It is finally, from the playing point of view and also from the cultural point of view, a little bit limiting. And of course, the brass ensemble is now taking over in many, many areas. And in a brass ensemble, and this is one of the hats that I'm wearing today, because I've been doing quintetting and big grouping for quite a long time. A lot of very disturbing questions have to be answered. Now, for instance, when Philip Jones decided to form a quintet in 1964, it was the direct final result, heavily galvanised result of hearing the New York Brass Quintet play in London. He was stunned. He had often wondered whether it would work having a tuba at the bottom to get mobility, but he wasn't at all sure. He then heard Harvey Phillips. He was knocked out. He immediately resolved to try and find a tuba player who could do that sort of thing. Well, of course, there wasn't anybody in England then, because we didn't have that tradition or background of playing, so there isn't a background. We had all of us been brought up in a support role, and very, very gradually this thing came about. We tried it out, but we were not sure, and we are still not sure, whether a tuba is the right instrument to have at the bottom of a brass quintet. That might seem a terrible temple-wrecking thing to say. Considering the mileage I've done and the money I've earned as a brass quintet player, it also sounds very ungrateful. But these questions do need asking every Monday morning at 9 o'clock, because sometimes the answers are not that good. Only about 2 months ago we gave a concert in a church. It was a perfectly middle-of-the-road programme with our quintet, and a man came into the dressing room afterwards and stunned my colleagues by saying, "No, it's jolly good, but I'm sure the tuba is the right instrument to have. I mean, it's so boomy, it seems to have nothing to do with all the other instruments." All this way off, you're trying to stuff a stinking pair of tails into a bag and backing into somebody else and treading on the vicar. And my colleagues were a bit shocked that I wasn't shocked. And they themselves had forgotten that actually this was the matter of debate, open debate all the time. When we tried new pieces in the 1960s, the question was, can you have this unrelated sound at the bottom? Of course, the theory, as we all know, 2 trumpets and a trombone, bright, horn and tuba, mellower and more flexible. Okay, that's the theory. In practice, though, we have, and I'm going into the dangerous area now because it affects both brass quintet and solo matters. We have an instrument which quite simply plays in a different language to trumpets. It's fine, it's wonderful when you're playing a hymn. You've got the tuba down at the bottom, playing in 4-part harmony, just the added octave down below. It's a lovely feeling. That's what the tuba traditionally was always for. But now, of course, in the modern quintet literature, you have musical conversation, musical dialogue. You have a trumpet saying one thing, and a trombone saying it in a fairly tolerable imitation. I mean, they've got these wretched slides, but, you know, some of them do quite well with it. And you've got French horns. I remember the French horn, you know. It used to be a lovely, bright instrument. It was a brass instrument. And people stuck their hand up the bell to mellow the sound, but basically it played in the same language as other ones. Nowadays, of course, it's changed. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's had to change. It's had to go with the times. It's gone round this way. Instead of going pop, it goes already you're running into trouble if you've got a conversation with a trumpet. Then you've got this commodity on the bottom. Talking about you. And quite a lot of quite uncomfortable questions do need to be answered fairly well before you can assume that it's the right instrument to have at the bottom. There are people who think it should be a bass trombone at the bottom of a quintet. And many of the results they produce, I think, validify their belief. However, it doesn't have the flexibility, and the sound finally is less contrasted, there's less variety within it. But we are now talking about playing vocabulary, and this is where our instrument suffers quite badly. Nowadays, everybody can play fast, and they can all play high and low. You know, all the kids. Actually, it's half an hour. I haven't played a note yet. Doing quite well. Right, I've played you something. Dialect, musical literacy, requires the ability to shape notes, to put different fronts on them, to put different middles into the middle of them, and to release them at the end in a way which enables literate musical phrasing. And if you speak to an eminent pianist or a conductor, or somebody who goes to regular chamber music concerts, is used to hearing the late Beethoven quartets or the Bartok quartets, Mozart. And if you really get them to analyse why they think brass are more limited, it usually boils down to this question of either dynamic range, which is all usually a little bit tiringly loud for our listeners, or it's the question of dynamic shading and note shapes, which is a separate sub-paragraph which we're due for at nearly 9:20. Note shapes are frantically important, and note shapes, of course, vary according to the tube length. The F tuba, which still in many parts of Europe is regarded as the true bass tuba, and theoretically it is, just going down the line in order of length. That you can say is the true bass tuba. Now the fact that it isn't any longer is not due to the fact that the F tuba has failed in its function. It's due to what has taken place in symphony orchestras over the past 15, 20 years in Britain, and also earlier in the United States. It's what I call the musical arms race. During the 20th century, those instruments which can develop in decibelage and power, in loud applause at the end of the concert power, have done. And what are they? They're the timps. How many people have sat next to the timps playing? It's a shocking sensation. They are very, very good. They're most often made in the States. They're superb instruments. theoretically a level of refinement is available from them, which somehow gets ignored. They are frantically loud. They are in kilowattage, vastly louder than they were 20, 50 years ago. Then what are the other ones? You've got the tips, I think, at the bottom, at the top of the arms race pyramid. The rest of the brass section. Now, you're used in the United States to big bore instruments. We copied gladly and enthusiastically the use of American trombones and American trumpets. They took over totally. I agree with that, hallelujah, because of the extended possibilities of these instruments. But of course, once you have I remember buying a few years ago a car with a very, very powerful engine, and it's lovely, you know, you get in and you go, you shouldn't drive like that, except every now and again for fun, or when you've got to overtake a juggernaut. But of course, once you've got a car like that, the temptation is to drive it like that all the time. And everywhere you go, if you set off from somewhere, you say cheerio, and you set off and you smother the assembled company. Well, the temptation is, of course, that you do that with a musical instrument. So decibelage has gone unnecessarily low. Woodwind have developed a little bit, but not that much. In Britain, we've gone from French type to German type. The difference in timbre, perhaps not so much in decibels. Strings, well, what can the poor strings do? You see, I remember when the string section was supposed to be the foundation of the symphony orchestra. In good old days. It's not like that now. It should be. In the States, you're used to rich string sound because this country was the greatest benefactor of the European influx during the 1930s, and orchestras like Philadelphia, Cleveland, Chicago have maintained that rich sounding tradition. We in Britain were more French oriented. Our string section can make a brighter, slightly more velvety sound, but it doesn't have the pure, rich, ripe melon sound which American orchestras do. Our string sound has not really developed very much. Woodwind a tiny bit more. You can stick metal strings on, you can put the sound post a bit further up, and you can play closer to the bridge. I remember trying it once. But we have now a decibelage extraordinary from trumpets and trombones. I've often said about the trombone that the harder you blow it, the louder it gets. Usually gets a laugh. And so the F tuba was the natural bass instrument in any British orchestra right up to the middle 50s perhaps. And I grew up listening to great players of the F tuba. Why were they great? It's the observance of very, very simple rules. First of all, good intonation, sound and positive production, not splatty, heavy, aggressive production, but absolutely put down punctuality, and clarity of the fronts of the notes, and the thing that we call projection. I'm not really quite sure what projection is. It's a very, very useful word. You line up 10 tuba players and make them play the same piece in quite a large hall. Out of the 10, there will probably be one who is very clearly audible at the back. All the power, the clarity, everything comes over. The other 9 can be seen to be less successful in one way or another. And it's not to do with decibels, it's not to do even with aggressive punch. It's just partly it's a combination of the way you put the note down and the quality of the sound. Now the F tuba has a clear, concentrated voice, and as such should be used, I think, considerably more often than it is. But of course, it can't compete once it gets down to the bottom of the bass clef, because it's very often well below the bass clef where we need that, what I call the German grunt. Which is why I use a Rudolph Meinl. I mean, it just happens to be a Rudolph Meinl. I mean, that room is festooned with marvellous C tuners and B flat tuners. But you do need that grunt below the bass clef. And so, of course, to do an orchestral job successfully, you've got to have 2 instruments. I can't see any other way out of it, I really can't. Because the brightness of the F is absolutely essential in a great deal of the literature. Not just brightness, but the pungency, the particular kind of attack. Especially in the British Orchestra, which plays quite a lot of music where the tuba parts were written with that kind of sound in mind. We actually do have in England a fantastic tradition of tuba writing from composers who didn't play the instrument, didn't care tuppence about how it worked or what a marvellous player Mr. X was. But there is something in the British mentality which I think uses the tuba really rather well. Vaughan Williams wrote the first tuba concerto, and nobody actually asked him to write it. It all happened a bit. He said he was going to write one for a long time. He had, of course, written marvellous orchestral parts. The tuba concerto came quite by accident. The LSA was having a Silver Jubilee. They sent letters to everyone saying they'd like to write a nice piece. Several people were invited to do Vaughan Williams and said, I've written a tuba concerto, will that do? And of course it did, until Capinet played it. Quite an assignment, really, because of course people have never heard a tuba playing on its own before, apart from the odd comical little outburst which makes everybody snigger. We've come a very, very long way since those days. But always the more pungent sound of the smaller tuba being played very, very well in tune, very punctually and very clearly, is what British composers had in mind. Now, as a kid coming into the business in 1964, I honestly didn't know what to do because I couldn't get a good F tuba. C tubas you could order from Germany, but we have no tradition, no traffic in C tubaing, and so you're doing it blindfold. And the next best thing was to use this brass band instrument, and my goodness, the class distinction certainly came out. Because we're going back to the question you asked a while ago. There were always, for a long time, two separate styles of playing. There was the brass band style, which is lyrical with quite a heavy vibrato, and less than adequate attention to the shape of the fronts of notes. I ought to start giving some demos in a minute, but I will do. And the brass bands, of course, do play with vibrato. The cornet, you can't play the cornet straight. The cornet is a singing instrument and so is the euphonium. So to go do is not a very good idea. It helps them to get that blend. It helps intonation, chording, that sort of thing. I'm now talking about the positive virtues of playing with vibrato. If it's too much of a vibrato, then suddenly it goes the other way and nothing quite gels at all, and you get this awful kind of uncoordinated bleat, which characterises the worst brass bands anywhere in the world, not just in Britain. But there were two styles, and to join a symphony orchestra on any instrument you had to learn to play straight. Well, for some reason that became the English tradition, and nobody is quite sure how or why it came about. Some people think that it was a gradual copy of the German style, but that's absolute nonsense because many Germans play with a very nice vibrato, on trombones in particular. It certainly wasn't copying the French style because the French have always used a very, very brilliant and very personable, engaging vibrato style, quite different from anybody else's, and hallelujah. So quite how our very, very level and straight style came to being, we're not quite sure, but it serves us rather well because vibrato, actually, you could do a whole hour seminar on vibrato because, of course, it's a bit like sex and alcohol, actually. It's a marvellous servant and a terrible master. Some days. I need actually to warm up. And so, for many years we've had this rather sad business of somebody from a brass band going to a college and having his vibrato ironed out, but having nothing quite put in its place, apart from a kind of what I would call a soulless honk. Now, vibrato is an expressive tool of the trade. It's part of everything in music, apart from this thing here. But all singing voice instruments, wind, strings and brass, they are voices of some sort or another. Okay, they're machines too, but they are voices operated by people, and vibrato, the warming of the sound, is a very important part of it. But if you do it all the time, then you overplay your hand. It gets tiring, monotonous if you play with vibrato absolutely all the time. It's fine if you're playing Italian opera aria type music where it's stage centre, way sort of deliberate. You do need a good hefty vibrato to get the rich ziz into the sound, whether you're a singer, instrumentalist, anything. But we do, I'm still answering your question, it's taking a long time. We are taught to play without vibrato for quite a lot of the time, which I think is a very good thing, because once you've learned how to play dead level. And it's quite hard to do, you know. A lot of people think that they're playing dead level and they're not. It is essential to be able to get that blandness before you then start building up whatever kind of expressive, whatever it is you want. And this is what our colleges supposedly teach. It's a so-called orchestral style. Yeah, I could play Meistersinger like that in the LSO. I mean, the trombones would snigger a bit, but nobody in the audience would demand their money back. If you play like that all the time, you know, it's like an anaesthetic. On the other hand, I've heard I'm taking the piss a bit, but a lot of brass banders just dropped in an orchestra would play it like that, and of course that doesn't fit either. So we've got to think very carefully about how we shape notes, and how we front them and how we tail them, and also where we breathe. Chester had some very interesting things yesterday to say about breathing. And of course, he said some things which are absolute fundamental truths. Constant air supply is the foundation of everything. The worst messes I've made of anything, be it solo, orchestral, brass quintet, have always been due to inadequate lack of breath, lack of message from down here, lack of air supply. And it's a funny thing, we English sort of don't really analyse things terribly much. I mean, I'm typically English as far as breathing is concerned. You know, my view is, well, you know, by all means breathe. There's a lot to be said for it, especially if you play a brass instrument. My colleague Dennis Wick has a very nice way of putting it. The secret about breathing is to remember. And that's a beauty, because we do forget. We blame our chops for all the things that go wrong, and it's tempting, because of course it feels as though it's them. It's like the last person out of a riot. Your chops are there and it feels as though it's there, but as though it's them. In truth, your chops are probably saying, looking back down your gullet and saying, for Christ's sake, what do you want me to do? And all your chops do is just form the notes and you know, make sure they're set properly for a top W or a bottom F or Z or whatever it is. But it's always got to be from down here. Why did I say that? I wasn't answering your question anymore. How are we doing? Before I launch into this one, how are we doing for questions? Any translations needed or any... Sir?
Would you finish that, the Meistersinger excerpt?
Trills. Spot on trills, yeah. They can sound perfectly idiotic on the tuba, let's face it, if you do them too fast or if you don't play the right notes in them. If you do any more notes than that, you then take me into subparagraph 44, which is that we in this room may very well have very well trained ears as far as low notes and big, wide, heavy sounds are concerned. If you're playing Meistersinger Overture or the Vaughan Williams Tuba Concerto or whatever else it is, you're playing it to people whose aural sophistication doesn't go down very far into the bass clef. Now, I do think this is terribly important, and it's forgotten by tuba players because we live our lives with low sounds, and because we can tell exactly what note it is, and we're preoccupied also with very low notes actually trying to play them at all because they're hard work and all that. And we do forget that most musical listeners hear the top, they hear the soprano, and they go downwards and they think the euphonium is lovely because it's still within the clear audibility range. As soon as you get onto this beast and the lower ones, a lot of people cannot tell what's happening even when the player is devastatingly accurate and lucid. Really, and we must remember this. So doing a trill very, very fast is a little bit counterproductive because to most people it just sounds like somebody having a fit with some valves. And I say this whole business about speed is rather fresh in my mind because I worked very hard to learn how to play Flight of the Bumblebee, playing the right notes and everything, because we do it as a joke encore with the Jones group. And there I am slaving away going. Speeding it up. And you finally, the concert comes and you get a bit shit scared as well. I mean, I can't actually play it until I'm shit scared. It's annoying. So somebody came up to me with a pair of binoculars at the end of one of the concerts and said, were you really playing all the notes? Right! And you think, oh dear. I was brought up in the old-fashioned way. I don't like making a dishonest living. But when my colleagues in the group who are here can't tell the difference between the one where nothing connects at all and the one where I think every note comes out, peas out of a pod. 1 in 5 when you're lucky and you're happy and the instrument understands what you're trying to do, all this sort of thing. If they can't tell the difference at close range and they're used to hearing, what can the poor paying public on whom we rely think? So we had to run it again the other day because we had some new people on board who didn't know the jokes. So I just did the... The question was about trills. Trilling is not a massive part of the curriculum, but there are just a few trills dotted about here and there, which I do think must be right, and I do think must not be too fast, and I do think should be clear and elegant. Meistersinger, well, if you're on a C tuba, then it's a lit trill. If you're on a B-flat tuba, then you take it backstage and get another one. If it's an F tuba, it's... Not too fast, but if it's an E-flat tuba, that's a mess. It's a mess. It sounds like a tuba trying to play a trill. I'm all for lip trills if it can. You need to warm up a bit if you're going to do trills. I should actually be giving a lecture on warming up. But does that answer anything? Yeah, good. Slow, and sometimes don't worry too much about whether you're trilling the tone specified or just a little bit more. Because doi is what you hear. And you'd be very lucky to actually hear what the notes are, especially in a big hall. That's another sub-paragraph, actually. We occupy ourselves rightly with saying, oh, that's a marvellous new instrument, that's fantastic, and I can do this on it, and every time I play, you remember my old one, it was quite this one is fantastic, make a terrible fuss, and we have a row of mouthpieces, Of course, we're right like to do it. There is later in the week a session on instrument design, and I love it. I've enjoyed very much helping in the sort of further development of this instrument. It does fascinate me, but it is a specialist hobby thing in a way, because I've been able to prove over and over again Leopold Stokowski's statement, which is quite simply that the hall people play in is at least as important as the instruments that the musicians play on, and very often just so much more of a factor that, quite honestly, we're wasting our time talking about, trills and dynamics and all that sort of thing, because rooms, this is quite a nice room to play in, but my goodness, I've played in some funny rooms. Some of them feel marvellous, and you come off all glowing with satisfaction to be told that you couldn't hear a single note. And, there are other rooms with polystyrene rooms, modern all-purpose halls, and let's face it, there are more and more of those these days, especially in Britain. We are suffering in this respect, where all the instrument design in the world and all the warming up in the world doesn't make a scrap of difference. It sounds and feels desultory, and they shouldn't have concerts in rooms like that, but they do. And everybody comes out grumbling because it doesn't sound as good as the record. It is a colossal factor, and you've always got the wrong instrument with you. You turn up somewhere with the right-handed one, and of course you should be going that way, and vice versa. You find yourself with the left-handed one, and there's a curtain and a cross-looking stage manager receiving the whole brunt of it. You take a forward bell. I've been experimenting with forward bells, and you can't see anybody else. You're still there blowing away, and they've changed the piece or something. So you can never quite be right. One of the great virtues of this particular model, E-flat tuba, is that we don't rest it on the chair, which is tiring. If you've got a bass trombone player here, you lift it rather higher above his ear than on the other one, which goes right into his ear, and you really have to get on terribly well to survive such a situation. It goes higher up, it goes in there, and you can shift the direction, because especially if you're playing in a brass quintet, it is essential to be able to either play straight down the centre gangway, if you're being a contrabass trumpet, or sort of move it right round here if you're underpinning the horn in an anonymous underpinning way as opposed to a positive way. Bell direction does make a colossal amount of difference. Unfortunately, you're never in a hall long enough to find out what difference it makes. Now, that's very sad. We are at a gross disadvantage on this instrument, however we design it. Think of those lucky trumpet players. They are idiots, some of them. Not all of them, but some of them. Now, you've got a music stand, and they do the whole of their recital like this. Now, the marvellous thing about the trumpet is that it sounds totally different, 6 inches from the music, 2 feet from the music, back from the music, back and over, forwards and over, and down the side. You get different timbres. Really skilled soloists, of course, know how to do that. That's if they don't play from memory. French horns can do it, and trombones and the symphony orchestra can do it too. You can vary the colours. With a tuba, you are a little bit stuck because it's hitting that wall, and you're getting the whole lot second hand. But that's another matter altogether. I was in the middle of saying something. Have we got any more questions while I remember what I was about to say?
Yeah. Instrument design. I read that horn and they were great, but what happens when you're a little short and you can't reach the fourth valve? Is there a trick for that? Change the pipe a little bit maybe?
What's the trick for that? Well, the best thing is for us to get together and me just have a look at you, because I don't have very long arms, and I'm no baby on this. It's what you're used to, isn't it? It goes along with driving on the left and that warm beer. We grew up this way, and I personally find it very much to my liking. I also like 4 in a row, as long as it's not here. I hate 4 in a row there. I like 4 in a row there. It lies naturally. Vroom, missed. But we are used to pistons in this formation. Other people are used to rotaries. As long as a valve works well, I don't really care too much whose patent it is, but I am used to pistons, and I know all the foul language it understands when it sticks, because they understand English and French. Yeah. I've run through most of my sort of topics, so it's now yours. It's now yes.
You were talking about the F-tuba earlier.
Yeah.
Do you use F-tuba regularly, or are you relying mostly on the E-flat?
No, I don't use F-tubas regularly because I was 43 last week, but that is very late to start on the F-tuba. But for all that time, I was unable to find a good one. There are a lot of very good English F-tubas, very, very good ones indeed. If I can just do a spot on the F-tuba, I've tried many, many German ones, which have certain virtues which I think cannot be beaten, a lovely clarity. It goes down to the bottom of the bass clef, and then suddenly for me, and I do emphasise for me, it stops dead. And some parts that one would play on an F-tuba don't go below that, and so you would be home and dry. So therefore, do you spend $4,000 on an instrument which would do 3 pieces for you? The answer is no, unfortunately, in Britain, because our method of funding is ramshackle, to say the least. Our orchestras don't buy instruments for us. Every instrument I've bought, I've paid for. I've never been given an instrument. I've paid for it because I'm free to say it's rotten. But the F-tuba, it's very close to the E-flat. It's close enough to be confusing. We grew up on the E-flat. Now, if you grow up on an instrument, there is a cut-off level where I'm prepared to say the time I would spend in learning to play the F-tuba, I'm better spent learning to play this one better. Having said that, there are just 1 or 2 spots dotted around where I do want an F-tuba, and I do actually have 3. They're all good. And one of these days, I'm going to turn up to the LSO, I need something to do Petrushka on. I just have a strange little personal problem with Petrushka. It should be a warning to everybody. I just hate that A-flat. I play it on the C-tuba instead of the E-flat tuba. But things like Midsummer Night's Dream, well, you know, if I played this on the E-flat and on the F, I wonder if you could tell the difference from, 50 metres. I don't think so. This is a little fruitier. It's a little bit heavier. It's not as sweet as the F, but it is heavier and it does dig its heels in very nicely. It records very well. It can get really almost as high as an F-tuba with very, very nearly the same clarity. But what surprises people about this hooter is the depth of sound it has as an additive. Now, this is another topic which I do think is important. People are sitting in that room blowing this tuba, blowing that tuba, having the time of their lives, which is terrific. And we're all saying, what do you think of that? Oh, it's darker than that. Oh, yes, well, I like that. Well, that's got a very good A-flat. All this business. They're judging the sound quality on its own. And, of course, the real test of any tuba has got to be what it does and what it sounds like and the messes it will get you into or the problems it will solve at the bottom of a group as an additive, as an underpinning to other instruments. And that is the first test of an instrument. Now, if you wanted to do other things, like sound sweet playing tunes and solos, well, that's fine, but that is a different thing to having an instrument which really has all the nutrient at the bottom of a group. The chances are that the instrument that has the proper nutrient at the bottom of a group is not very pretty on its own. I came to accept that fact years and years ago. I've got a lovely Rudolph Meinl. I would never play a solo on it. I mean, you'd all laugh. But it's partly my playing inadequacy, but for me it's the additive quality that it has. The Alexander has this, Hirschbrunner, of course, all the various people in there all have different qualities. But it is what they sound like in the group and not what the bass trombone player thinks of it. Never ask a bass trombone player. I've been very, very lucky all my life with bass trombone players. Really, I'm the most fortunate man in the world. If I, when I finish up at the pearly gates and I'm thanking God for what happened to me, it is actually the colleagues I've worked with for which I'll be most grateful. I've been in some scrapes. I've sat next to a marvellous bass trombone player who doesn't waste words. For instance, several years ago, Chester was talking about breathing yesterday. Several years ago, I toured Southeast Asia. And there are a lot of insects in Southeast Asia, and so you take even half a breath and the little wretch goes straight in, and before he drowns, he bites, and you get a terrible throat infection. It happened to all of us. And so in self-defence and absolute phobia, I started going like this, breathing in, keeping the tongue right round the mouth, just to stop the wretches going in. There was still plenty more to go, but I stopped the rest. I came home, and I think it wasn't long before we did the Berlioz Fantastique. And in London we played that on the little and often breathing principle. Instead of... Yeah, we top up. We take 2 gallons at a time instead of 16. First person does 3, second person does 4, you carry on in 2s. The whole orchestra, when you play that at rehearsal, all the strings, all the rest of the brass, they all go in unison. And of course, visiting conductors don't see the joke, and they think they're being very cruel. However, there was one occasion when I was doing it louder than any of the piss takers, and that was quite serious. And we came to a concert, and Frank Matheson, my colleague, who's on the concert, said, "Shut up!" It was quite loud, and I thought, oh, well, I really must do something about it, otherwise you're going to be yelling, "Shut up!" on all the concerts. You need good colleagues, but don't ask them whether an instrument sounds good, because they're far too close to it. They're far too close to it. Instruments which sound good here very often don't sound anything at all at a distance, and it is distance that we're looking for, because concert halls are big. Even if a brass quintet concert, it's probably going to be in a room this size, maybe. Although, of course, you do find yourself in weird situations, but you are looking for the ability to project. We're also looking for clarity. This takes me on to another topic, which Chester also mentioned yesterday, about colouring the sound of the mouth. You see, we're all talking about instruments and mouthpieces as being the source of this or that adjustment, and it's you that's making the noise. You know, you're going down a brass tube. And whenever you're getting too serious or too anxious and in a terrible mess, and you know your life is collapsing around you, just remember that all you're doing is you're going down a tube, and no one asked you to do it. You know, just imagine the scene up there when St. Peter's ticking everybody off. Yes, I solved the starvation problem in India. Yes, I got an airline going to New Zealand. Yes, and you go. What did you do? I played the tuba. What does that involve? Well, you see, you've got this great big flips of brass thing. You say, all right, go on. But you know, there are lots of different ways of going, because you know, you see, it's your lip that makes the noise. That's the reed. But the sound you make is partly produced by that. It's partly produced by the cavity behind. And there is a natural tendency to have the biggest cavity behind, like Italian opera singers or something like that. Oh, so everything opens up, open throat and everything, and finally you can hardly hear anything. If you want to be more audible, you've got to actually close everything up until somebody like me who's got a very, very average voice, you can close your mouth like that, and it sounds, you know, it sounds like a lot of those people up in the north of England where I come from, you see. You can colour the sound you make very effectively. Slacken your face and open up. If you're looking for timbre within a note, then it's lovely to expand and make a rather more fruity and luscious sound. But supposing you're playing, not necessarily the flight of the bumblebee, but a brisk passage where clarity and punctuality are the order of the day. Let me see, Alleluia chorus. Yeah, that's with a fairly closed mouth. If I close it right up, play very tight. That's not very pretty, but it will sound at the back of a church or a boomy hall far clearer than... That one.
That was very nice for minims.
And that one is much better for minims. We call them minims, damn it. Minims are half notes. Quavers are eighth notes. Semi-quavers are 16th notes. Connoisseurs of the tuba obviously don't find that last one particularly pretty, but it's the one that works. You know, if you've got mystified customers wondering why there's this instrument at the back going, that is part of the necessary skill. Be careful though, because if you close your mouth, normally the pitch goes up, and if you open it, normally the pitch goes down. Very good weapon. That's how I do vibrato, as a matter of fact. You know, most instruments will give you a semitone. So be very careful that you line up that with the pitch, with the right pitch and the right cavity. That's definitely a Fletcher sermon. Any questions? There's quite a few things I haven't talked about. Yeah.
What kind of things you feel are important in your practice routine?
Practice routine. I don't have a practice routine because, you know, I have to do 50,000 playing miles a year. And so the English are not routine-minded. I think as a race we're not. Neither are we warm-up minded, because there are some days when you really don't need to warm up very much at all. There are other days when it just feels terrible, and the only way to get it going is to practice, just play sensible, basic things. There are other days when you need to warm down. You know, I do know a very famous principal cornet player in England who has a warm down after a concert. He does all his high things all over the instrument, terrific virtuoso, wonderful to listen to. He goes to the band room just for 5 minutes and does low notes after the concert that night. And he swears, I haven't dared try it because, you know, the pubs outside London close at 10:30. He swears that makes him feel far better the next morning, and he may well be right, I don't know. It's worth trying. Look, it does depend what you did or didn't do yesterday and last week, and what you've got to do today and tomorrow in 4 days' time. If we've got the Ride of the Valkyries coming up, I mean, I haven't warmed up this morning. I mean, I've just been doing a kind of public trousers down warm-up for all of you, which is actually, you're entitled to hear, because this isn't a finished product session. It's about, you know, how we approach things. If the Ride of the Valkyries is coming up, I find that very hard, and if I don't practice low notes, by God, I'm in trouble. And low notes are a nuisance. They take a lot of air, and they're very tiring, and your neighbours wonder what the hell you're doing and why you're doing it. So you can just imagine, can't you, somebody sort of going... And, is young Arthur still doing his music? I'll tell you a lovely one for low notes. It's a beauty. Several years ago, I was told by a very cross brass bandsman in a pub after a concert that I wouldn't last 2 minutes in a brass band. He was referring to something we've been talking about. So I thought, oh, yeah, I wouldn't last 2 minutes in a brass band. What do you do for 2 minutes in a brass band? And I went... If you do that for 2 minutes, it doesn't have to loosen up the low notes. I mean, if I did that for 2 minutes now, it's very entertaining. You would hear it improving. You know, when you get up in the morning, personally, I don't have much grip on the bottom register. You know, the notes are there, but it's a strangulated fart noise. They're not... The instrument isn't resonating, and your lips feel terrible, and you want to just sort of go back to bed. But, for instance, that would be the kind of thing. But supposing it's the Warm Williams Tuba Concerto, see, that's a terrible nuisance, because you've got to tighten the face up like nobody's business. And I personally, either I'm older or wiser, or certainly the fact is that I can no longer, like I did as a teenager, just get up and play the Warm Williams Tuba Concerto, because I've opened up the dynamic range, and I've really got to do some hard blasting in the top. I mean... I've got to go over all the corners in that and blow them hard, so that playing it loudly on a concert doesn't come as a shock. Otherwise, supposing it's an average week, supposing you've had an average week, you've got no semiquavers to do, and you've got no semiquavers next week and you haven't done any, it's as well to keep everything going on a united front if you can. But if you can does involve a lot of things. It depends on what time you get back at night. You don't want to disturb people. You can put a practice mute in. And the warming up business, of course, we do have a different attitude to that, because most places where brass bands or brass ensembles or orchestras play, in my experience, have very, very limited space and accommodation backstage, and we have that 1 hour when the cellists want to have a bit of a rest. And so to have somebody going, occupying a whole booming corridor and the music flowing, going, it may make that person feel better and more like playing, but it's a terrible nuisance to 90 other people, you see. And you've got to remember that. Terrible bloody nuisance. And it's the same in the brass bands. You should see the places the brass bands play. They're sort of standing in the street outside, warming up, or sitting in a van or the car or something, and it's very limited. You've got to be very honest about how warm up is. You can very often use the first piece to warm up in. Very often the first piece you play on a programme. And if you're doing recitals, always pick a nice straightforward piece to start with some nice chunky quarter notes and half notes in it, just to get the chops warm. And also to overcome the little feelings of stage fright, which I do hope you get, because if you don't get stage fright, you're not really a performer. It's essential. The best things I do are often when I'm shit scared, and that's another matter. In the sort of pasteurised atmosphere of practice, of course, you can do all these things reasonably well. No, gear practice intelligently to what you did yesterday and have got to do tomorrow, and I can't do any better than that. Don't practice endless high notes just because you've got the Warm Williams to come up. If you practice up there, then the whole face tightens up, and all these muscles suddenly will say, "What are you doing?" And you'll probably get a wobble. Don't forget we're face athletes and lung athletes. And if an athlete suddenly were to be doing 100-yard sprints, many per day, far more than he usually does, then his legs are going to go. And especially if you start first thing in the morning trying to do that sort of thing, you're going to do yourself an injury. So just remember that we weren't actually designed by the Almighty to go down a tube. It's something we've brought on ourselves. It's great fun and great amusement. The fun, I enjoy playing this thing more than ever. Part of the enjoyment, of course, is to do it better. Occasionally I come off a platform and think, oh God, but I'm getting old in the tooth now, and there'll probably be several next week which will be all right, and there was one very good run in 1971 that I remember as well. So, you sort of keep fueled up and you go on, and some days it's not as good as others because we're human. There are some days when too much practice can wreck it. I'm quite sure of that, but knowing which is the one to under-practice for and over-practice for is quite a skill. There are some people blowing brass instruments at the age of 80 who still haven't sorted that one out, but there are many days when the best ones I've done have been with no practice. Straight in, do it. But if you can't rely on it, because the next one will be a disaster. So,
you mentioned the band competition at Albert Hall. Is that open to the public? And if so, how would you find out about it?
It's open to the public, but my goodness, those seats are so coveted. I can't get into it. The only time I've got into that was as a reviewer reviewing it for a magazine and adjudicating. When you're actually in the box. They put you in a box. You're locked in a box for the whole day in the pitch black. There's a grill for some air, and you're given your food and the whole lot. It takes 5 hours, and you listen to the same piece probably 20 times, and they put a bucket in the corner. It's hard.
When you practice with a mute, isn't it different as far as the back pressure in the mouthpiece? And do you find it useful to practice with a mute?
Well, actually, yes. It is useful to practice with the mute because it feels marvellous when you take it out. That's quite seriously. If you blow hard against a mute, it's very useful for, you arrive at a place, you've got 47 minutes before the show, and, you're going to be taken straight there, no warm-up time. There's a motel, there's an airline pilot next door getting the vital sleep before doing Hawaii. You mustn't make a noise. I've got a euphonium mute that goes all the way into the bell, stops it down completely. I also use it as a normal mute, and it's very good for practicing, just really opening up. You've got to practice loudly. people often don't practice loudly, you know. They're in a small room and they play at comfortable dynamics which feel loud in a practice room. You know, there are times when you've really got to give it some welly at home. Otherwise you forget what the sensation is. You get back on there for real and the din around you is forcing you to blow loudly and you tense up. And when you tense up, everything starts going wrong. The breathing first of all. So do practice playing loudly. It's terribly important. Really give it one for 1 minute or however. Don't hurt yourself. Just remember what it's like and remember that that's your duty for certain moments in concerts. Wow. How are we doing? Anything I haven't said yet? High notes. High notes are a joke. I remember, you know, people are often astonished at how high a tuba can go. Well, of course it can. I mean, all you've got to do is tighten your mouth up, and you know the sky's the limit. It's a terrible shame that a lot of people don't attempt Ole Schmidt's tuba concerto because they say there is a super double top F in the last movement. Now, that's about the least important thing about it, you know, as long as you can go whoop and make some kind of gesture. It's a bit of circus, but they are fun to do once in a concert. It's like doing a quick drag act. You put on somebody else's clothes, everybody hoots with laughter and then finish. Don't do it with composers listening. For the simple reason that they suddenly put it into some serious context and it then becomes a daunting problem. But you know, you get high notes by just tightening the face down here. Down here. Never press. Never do that. That went well. That is not the instrument is not resonating. It's my embouchure at the end of a pipe going. That's all. But they're a joke. But don't take them seriously. Don't go into corners and practice super top W's because you've heard somebody else do it. Do it as a sort of, you know, a bit of amusement for yourself and a once only on a concert amusement for the audience, because it's a bit of circus, you know, it's the elephant standing on its head just for a second, but you know, if you... elephant standing on its head for 2 hours is, you know, you start looking for other things to do. Double stopping. Don't do this with composers listening, but you know, it is quite a laugh to them. Again, you see, a lot of composers are asking for this sort of thing, and the tuba does lend itself rather well to it. So again, do that for amusement. For God's sake, don't do it in an hotel room, or like that horn player that Weber wrote the concertino for. The landlord will charge you double. There must be other joke things which must always be treated as jokes. I mean, the bottom register, you know, you hear people, well, you hear me actually sometimes. Let that be a lesson to you. Always warm up in the morning. But you know, ever since things like the craft encounters with pedal this, that and the other, you know, people are practicing down there. Well, it's fine, but it is only an effect. You know, a normal person can't tell you what that note is at all. They wouldn't have a clue. When I think of the distinguished conductors who get the octave wrong that I'm playing in an orchestra, you know, how can you expect audiences to be totally tuned into what you're doing right down there? But it's nice to practice it, because not so much for musical effects, but other effects. A lot of contemporary music has kind of writing in it. It's all part of the vocabulary nowadays, but again, don't take it seriously. Just enjoy the feeling. It's quite a nice feeling, actually. No, maybe it's not. I don't know. Must be something that I haven't told you. I'll remember it. If we wind up now, I'll remember it something at the door. No question. Sorry, Jim.
I don't have
No,
a
I didn't.
Yes, you did.
Oh, sorry.
I don't have a question, but before this thing is over, I thought I'd like to share one quick thing with you all. 2 or 3 years ago, the London Symphony was in Los Angeles for the first time. But I hadn't been for I don't know if it was there the first time he was there or not, but it was a wonderful concert. And after the concert, we were all kinds of musicians were in the lounge or downstairs. And I quite candidly overheard the first cellist of the London Symphony, who I forget get his name, telling another cellist, the finest musician in the London Symphony is John Fletcher.
So I'll get him for that. As a matter of fact, the reason I've got to leave this a day too early is because he's playing the Elgar Cello Concerto, and I've got to be there. Andre Previn's last concert with the London Symphony Orchestra. Altogether, it's been 17 years and very good too. So that's why I'm leaving early, because I think it's very important to do so. But if there aren't any more questions, I'm going to be around. Yes, we have one. Another one.
Have you ever played, have you been amplified when you've been playing?
Oh yeah, I use my kids' rock gear, flangers and octavers and all those things. You mean the mouthpiece?
No, like through a microphone. You know,
Oh, well, yeah, of course I have, yeah.
And how do you find the amplification methods that are used now? 'Cause
Oh, they're mostly damnable. Most amplification is, most recording is, because most recording engineers, sorry, this is another hour-long thing, isn't it, Harvey? Recording, recordings are machines, and the machines are designed by people who have their own idea of what instruments sound like. Most people are reasonably clear what a trumpet and a trombone sound like, although very often they sound a bit like that, but it doesn't matter very much. But most of the recordings that I play in, I've just got used to the fact it sounds like this, because if you shove that sort of a sound into a big amplifier, they could control it easily. And most of the recordings I've done are either like that, or they're, the hippo in a bathroom, where it really doesn't matter what you do. It's one or the other. There are very, very few recordings that I've heard of my most esteemed colleagues, where I think they've been done any justice by the recording, and it is difficult to do. I'm not altogether criticising the recording industry, because they actually partly don't know, and once they've made their product, it then goes away to be pressed and mixed and all the other things by somebody in a lab who doesn't care touch what a tuba sounds like. So we do suffer quite badly in this respect, and I don't know what the answer is apart from to do all your recording yourself. I've got some mics at home which make me sound quite like I think me sounds like, and there are times when I'm tempted to take them to recording sessions and just sort of stick them up and then of course you would be in trouble. But recording is a tricky area for tubas. It grieves me that a lot of people know me through recording, and I can't actually most of the recordings truthfully I've not heard, because I know I'm going to be sick when I do hear them, so I've avoided it. Records are what happens on a Thursday morning when you're either in good shape or bad shape. As far as I'm concerned, concerts are the only thing that count. Real events with real people turning up to make you nervous, and when you're nervous, then things might happen. You might collapse, you might make a terrible mess of it because you're nervous, but you might play better than you've ever played before. That's the one you're chasing. Records, that's not nerves, that's negative tension. That's the end of that sermon, Harvey. It was quite short, actually. Any more? No more? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how do you work with students on improving their information?
I'll say, that's out of tune. No, sorry, do you want a paragraph on this? Because, again, one of the disadvantages of the tuba is upper instruments rely on you for good tuning. If a tuba is out of tune, especially in a brass group, it throws up foul, rancid harmonics which mess up everybody above, and the principal trumpet's there wondering why he can't get a third. And it's because that sod down the line is playing flat or sharp or out of tune. And it's a very hard one. A person who plays consistently out of tune has probably got a bad ear, and probably won't. I'm a great fatalist. I think there are some people who can tell when they're out of tune, and others who probably never quite will. And you can just coax them one way or the other. You can say, on average, valve that down or lift that down. I use the mouth for tuning. I don't think there's any other way, because, okay, on the big tuba I'm doing this quite a bit up there, but on these it's a waste of time. The mouth is more important, and there's no such thing as in tune anyway, because some notes have got to be a bit up because that note on the horn is a bad one. The harmonics he's throwing out for the trumpets are not quite right, so that's got to be a bit up, that's got to be a bit down. You're rocking Peter to pay Paul all the way. There's no such thing as an in-tune tuba. And if you invent it, you're stuck with having to then be in tune with everybody else with their in-tune trumpet. It's all glider pilots. It's like being put in a glider up there and you've got to get it down without bumping it.
In the orchestra, do you pay close attention to the principal trumpet or principal trombone?
It depends if he's
bass
there.
section or...
Yes, of course I do. Yes. Listen very carefully, but we've got a wonderful principal trumpet. The intonation is so secure, I don't think about it at all. I just go boom and push it down. It's the same note that's been there for 16 years. It's sharp. It's really not staying up to you. I've been messing about. Big practicing on a harder than Venice or something. All these things do mess up tune. But do practice the Carnival of Venice. That's my ambition to play it one day. Did Mike do it last night? Yeah. It was one of the greatest memories of my life was hearing Mike do that at the Royal Albert Hall after the Brass Band Championships in the most hostile and chauvinistic atmosphere anybody can play. He got up and played that piece like I had never heard it. It's fantastic, marvellous. And I was asleep, I was jet lagged last night, but I have heard it. It's marvellous. It's terrific. Don't spend all your time practicing it. For goodness sake, practice something else as well. Sorry.
Now, I know it's getting near the end, but is there one memory that you've had in your career that you consider a really memorable musical experience?
Yes, playing Brahms' Second Symphony with Carl Byrne at the Salzburg Festival. There aren't very many notes in the tuba part, but my goodness. Yes, that's it. That's the one I take to my go. There are hundreds of others, and you never know when they're going to strike. That's the nice thing about music. It's not necessarily up on the high altar or the poshest place. We turned up to Columbus, Georgia, years ago with Yasha Horenstein, and we did Rosenkavalier like I've never heard it since. And that's just one little thing. You don't know when St. Cecilia up there is going to suddenly single you out one night. You go patiently around hoping, you do your best, but every now and again it strikes, it's gold here and there, and it can be the most unlikely places. When it's in a festival hall, of course, it's nice, because then the critics stop moaning. Usually it's somewhere else. Yeah, Brahms too. About how many notes are in that tuba part? Anybody counted them? 50. I'll let you find them there.
One quick question. We played the E flat too on the Bedford Brothers Spring Symphony.
Yes. Yes, we're running over time, Harvey. Is that the worry? Look, I play a C tuba most of the time in the symphony orchestra because its weight of, rightly or wrongly, its weight of sound and the depth of sound that we're looking for because of the arms race. But there are a lot of things which are far better done on it. And the Spring Symphony is absolutely one of those, no question. You've got to have that punch. It's an E-flat part. You know, but Britain and people like that have that sound in mind. Havergal-Brian. Pardon? Havergal-Brian Gothic Symphony it's in the Guinness Book of Records as the longest and the most expensive symphony ever written. The tuba part is 50-something pages. There are two tubas. He didn't play the instrument, he just loved it. Up and down the whole time. We could actually have a whole symposium one day studying just that one tuba part. Extraordinary. Rather good.
There wasn't the arm tricks, as you say. What pieces would you then do on C-tuba?
What tuba? What pieces?
Yeah, what arm tricks, what pieces would you still use on C-tuba? Appalachian, everybody else.
What pieces will I use the C-tuba on? Well, don't forget, a lot of the orchestral repertoire, actually, it doesn't matter either way. And it sounds bone idle, but I very often use what's on the van, which happens to be the C-tuba. There's a lot of orchestral tuba parts, it really doesn't matter. But there are some where I would consider myself professionally a bit negligent if I turned up and did, well, say the Spring Symphony, since you mentioned it, but Berlioz's overtures. I wouldn't want to do on a C-tuba. It's not a question of the safety. It's the rather over fatness. It's the middle-aged spread which the C-tuba will give you. But if I turned up to do Prokofiev 5 on this. It would be remarkably efficient, and a lot of people wouldn't actually notice or complain probably, but you just do need that extra snort and grunt. Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet. I know that's coming, I'm going to practice anyway, but I wouldn't play on this. Not really. It's a C bar. Right, the Valkyries. A lot of Wagner. Well, what do I think of the B-flat tuba? If it's a good B-flat tuba, then there are lots of things in the orchestral repertoire which actually are very good on the B-flat tuba. There's no doubt about it. But how many bloody tubas are you going to carry around? That's the next question. I've got 10 at home. And it's a fairly big house, but I've got 10 tubas. I've got 2 kids and a mother and wife as well. You've got to make room for them all.
In that order?
I'm supposing my one piece that I thought goes marvellously on the B-flat tuba, I'm supposing something else on the programme is very definitely better on something else. Then forget it again. But I've heard people play the B-flat tuba in the symphony orchestra very well. They're used to it. I think if you grew up on the B-flat tuba, why not stay with it? Because it's the same old thing. Practice the instrument that you know and play that better. That's sometimes preferable to messing about the other gear, but not always. You fall into your own habits for your own reasons.
Your Philip Jones brass work is done in E-flat.
Yeah. Clarity. Clarity. What did Chester say yesterday? Clarity. Our biggest problem, and it's got to be on a small instrument, if you're playing any kind of sentences, if you're speaking in any kind of way, playing lines, musical conversation, clarity. Remember always, if you think you're clear, non-bass player people don't think so.
You're speaking about clarity, but there's really, there's not been a lot of said about how to develop specific techniques. Personally, I find the mouthpiece comes from how do you feel about that?
Mouthpiece, yeah. Mouthpiece playing is also very useful for traffic jams because we spend a lot of our time. The hardest thing about being a professional musician in London is getting to the assignments, getting to where you've got to be. It's damnable. We don't have your throughway. Mouthpiece practice is quite useful. I learned to double tone the mouthpiece sitting in traffic lights. It gets the chops going and you arrive, exactly on the downbeat and the conductor goes like that. And you can sit down and you can play the first note like that without embarrassment because you're not all done. Achieving clarity though, generally speaking, clarity can only be achieved with a reasonably tight face. Not with what I would call a trumpet embouchure necessarily, but if you've got large lips and you're well endowed and can make a nice fat sound just by going forward, then you're going to have more problems than somebody like me that's got a very average sized mouth. It works reasonably efficiently, but it's only very average sized. I didn't make a fat noise. I heard clarity as a kid, therefore I subconsciously tried to imitate it. If you've got a musical ear and you try to emulate something, very often you don't talk about muscle or how to do it. It sort of slowly comes by the process of imitation and input. But the face has got to be reasonably tight and the mouth not too wide open. In other words, back to what I said earlier about closing up a little bit if you've got to actually utter sentences. If you're playing a nice big fat note, then but it's much cheaper than buying 27 mouthpieces. You can get by on one. Nobody can find the perfect mouthpiece anyway, can they? Anybody found the perfect mouthpiece? Yeah? Anybody? No. But you find one that sort of does quite a lot of things reasonably well most of the time.